Welcome to Java with Juli. I am Juli Slattery, the host of this podcast, and this podcast is an outreach of Authentic Intimacy, which is a ministry helping you make sense of God and sexuality. Hey, I'm super grateful for the conversation that you're about to hear. My guest today brings honesty and hope in the midst of a topic that is usually surrounded by a lot of confusion and fear, particularly within faith communities. My guest is Tony Scarcello. He is an author and pastor. He has just released a new book called Love All Our Neighbors, and this grows out of his personal journey of following Jesus while in the midst of wrestling with same-sex attraction, navigating sexuality within his marriage, and working through some deep questions about faith, identity, and what it means to belong in the church. Tony shares candidly about the tension that he's experienced of wanting to honor God while feeling the need to hide parts of his story, and how God's grace met him right in the middle of that struggle. Tony is married to his wife Leslie and serves as a pastor of discipleship at Red Hills Church near Portland, Oregon. I believe this conversation is not only going to encourage you personally, but also help you better understand God's heart for those who are navigating some really sensitive questions around sexuality. Here's my conversation with Tony Scarcello. Well, Tony, thanks so much for being willing to come on Java with Juli and share a little from your experience and your own story.
Thank you so much for having me, Juli. I'm a big fan of yours and love the work that you do, and I'm just really honored to be here.
I learned about your story and the book that you have coming out just recently and had the opportunity to read through it. And I was so encouraged by it and challenged. But I think the first thing that jumped out to me was just your level of vulnerability of your story of wrestling with same-sex attraction and shame and silence around all that for many years, and then walking that out in ministry. And so let me just thank you for the courage to be so open, and also ask you, what has given you the courage to be so bold and open about your own story?
Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you for your encouraging words. Yeah, the courage. Honestly, if I did not have a deep sense of my belovedness in the eyes of the Lord, there would be zero courage here. We might get into this later, but when I first came forward with my story, virtually every scary thing I thought would happen did happen, with the exception of my marriage stayed intact, and we've been together over 11 years now. But so there was like a lot of reason not to have courage, and there was about a year and a half there of, the popular term at the time was deconstructing and wandering through the wilderness. And the Lord just met me in such a generous and sweet way, and just over and over and over again reassured his love for me. And so if I didn't have that well to draw from, that even if people leave or reject or abandon me in response to my story, that even if that happens, I'm still just held by the Lord. And in that courage and confidence, that gives me feel a lot of freedom to talk about this without too much fear. I also have just a really tremendous wife and friends and family, and the people who I've invested deeply into, have seen the absolute worst of me, stuff that will never go on a podcast, and they have stayed with me in spite of all of that. And so when you have that, it's easy to kind of weather the minor rejections from people who don't know you as well.
Yeah. You mentioned what happened in your life when everything came out in the open. Walk us through what happened and just kind of the fallout.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a capital P Pentecostal charismatic church, very conservative politically. Grew up in that church and realized when I was 11 or 12 years old that I experienced attraction to the same sex. I kept that a secret until I was 23. I spent my high school and middle school years, late middle school and high school years, were spent with a lot of fantasizing about suicide, a couple of suicide attempts, a lot of self-harm. And all of that is just stemmed from the belief that this made me fundamentally detestable and unworthy of love and belonging. And it gave me a lot of questions about God. Like we were raised in like this interesting intersection of Pentecostal theology and like a weird affection for like more modern Reformed theology of like predestination. And so I had like a season where I was just like, man, I think God created me like as a reprobate. Like I think like I am created to be damned, and that's why I have these desires. And so the Lord met me when I was in high school. I was 16 or 17 years old, in a really, really profound and beautiful way. On a night where I had intentions of committing suicide. After my parents went to bed, I went into my dad's bedroom and pulled out his revolver from his dresser drawer and went into my room. And I remember sitting in my room contemplating what would happen if I pulled the trigger. What would happen? I know that my parent would wake my parents up. I knew that my dad would likely be the one to come in to check, and he would see what I had done. And even after playing all that scenario out in my head, I still kind of came to this conclusion that this would be better for them than if they knew that their son, at the time, the only language I had was gay. And I just saw the paths ahead of me. I was like, it can be suicide, or it can be trying to continue to white knuckle this and like just deal with this like agonizing anxiety and despair, or eventually like I would give in and just kind of leave church and faith and all that behind in my family and be rejected. And so I thought that the most honorable path that would honor everybody involved was suicide. We didn't have anybody in my story who experienced same-sex attraction where it was just normal that they would resist it. We had heard stories of people who had been miraculously changed. And of course, we know how most of those stories ended up down the road. And so so I felt that was the honorable thing to do. But around 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone started ringing. And it was one of the volunteers in my youth group. As I was a student, he was a college student, and he was back home with his family for spring break in California. And he just said, Tony, like I was up playing video games with my brother, and I just got an overwhelming sense of sadness, and you came to my mind. And he said, I just felt like the Lord wanted me to call you and tell you that he loves you so much. And he asked me how I was doing, and I told him I was like not doing good. I didn't tell him how unwell I was doing. But he said, I want you to open your Bible to Psalm 5. And so I grabbed my Bible off my nightstand, and it's just in Psalm 5, David says, Lord, you consider every sigh. Like you just hear every groan that I make. Like it doesn't fall on deaf ears. And all of a sudden, like what felt like an insurmountable gap between me and the Lord, like where my projection of God was that he was just like judgmental, standing off, like really hated me. And all of a sudden, like I just felt in David's shoes, and I just felt the Lord's sigh and grief for my pain. Not because he was detested by me, but because he loved me. And so I was just like overwhelmed. I told my friend, thank you. I hung up the phone. I got up to go get a glass of water in our kitchen. And my mom had a glass crystal cross that she would set on her windowsill. And the way that either like our porch light or the moon was shining through the crystal cross, it illuminated on our back wall, like across the kitchen, just this beautiful, like luminescent cross on the wall. And when I walked out there and I saw that, I felt the Lord. And the best way I know how to use it is like, I didn't hear an audible voice, but it was like somebody plugged in a hard drive and downloaded the information into my soul. I just felt the Lord saying like, because of what I did on that cross, nothing stands between you and me but my love for you. Like that's all that there is between us. And he made a promise to me that if I surrendered everything to him, he would give me a life that was thrilling and fulfilling. And I said, yeah, but, like, God, there's this and you won't take it away. And every time I did that, I just felt him just like calm me down. And so I went from overnight, like kid who was getting detention and getting in fights at school and getting wasted at parties and like high on weed most days at school. Like I went from that to literally the next day, the kid who's bringing his Bible to school and just like reading it during lunch. And it was just like a complete 180. So I know this is a way longer than what you asked us to your question.
If you don't mind me just asking you a few follow-up questions from what you've already said before you kind of go into the next chapter. So you're talking about maybe 5 or 6 years of living in sort of that secret agony of thinking, I'm detestable, I'm a monster. Was it just because you had desires and you didn't know what to do with them? Was it because of behaviors that came out of that desire? Like, what were those 5 or so years like? What fed that shame?
Yeah, that's a great question. My desires came about realizing first I had a friendship in youth group, and my feelings towards him got really confusing. And I didn't really have a category at that time to realize I was developing a crush for him. And I had a dream one night where we were like just cuddling. And like that, I woke up from that dream and I was like, what the heck is that? And why do I feel the way I feel after that dream? Later that year, we had our youth group went to church camp. And this same boy and we were sharing a cabin. And we didn't have a cabin leader in our room, so there was no adult supervision. Like they were short on volunteers, and thought we were responsible kids. Yeah. And so we were in this room, and one thing led to another, and like I had my first sexual experience with him. And that was when I realized like there's no more confusion about what's going on here. What fed the shame, honestly, I mean, this is very like Brené Brown 101, but silent secrecy and judgment. I didn't let anyone in on it. I kept it a secret. I was quiet about it. And every voice around me, whenever this came up, was like of the utmost disgust and disdain. We wouldn't watch The Ellen Show, and my parents hated Rosie O'Donnell, and there was like should we let them watch Finding Nemo because Ellen DeGeneres plays one of the fishes in it.
Yeah.
And there was just a lot of like, this is bad, this is evil, this is something people choose in defiance of the Lord's design. And I was just sitting there just like, man, I'm so screwed up. I don't even remember choosing this. Like I don't even know like at what point like I made this deal to want this. And so like that, years of that, just like compounded shame, developing crushes on boys at school and having hopes and, all the stuff that comes with a crush that something will happen, and then realizing like, oh God, like that's like sin. And then just reinforce that narrative of like, you're an evil, disgusting monster who does want this. And that was kind of where the shame came from for me.
And your parents probably were totally oblivious that the things they were saying about other people, you were taking very personally.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely. And
yeah.
And I think this is just like a good message for anybody. I think the latest survey I read is that 1 in 10 people, like if you put 10 people in a room, one of them is likely to experience some type of struggle, whether it's gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction. And you oftentimes when you're in your rooms with your closest people and you feel safe to like make jokes that you would never want anybody to hear you make, or comments but the little bit of the real you comes pouring out, and like people just didn't know that when they were saying such awful things, they were talking about my experience, and that I was internalizing all of those comments and jokes and comparisons to bestiality and pedophilia. Like I was like internalizing that as like, oh my God, that's me. I'm just as bad as those things.
Yeah. And it wasn't just in your family, from what you wrote in your book, it was also the church conversation, and some of the godliest people in your church that you looked up to were using language and speaking about people that would have same-sex experiences or feelings in that way as well.
Yeah. I remember we had these Sunday school teachers. They were older ladies, and just like the sweetest, big hugs, make you cookies on your birthday, remember your birthday, like that kind of stuff. Like just really great Sunday school, ideal, exactly who you want. But I started realizing this in 2004, and that was when the first state legalized gay marriage, and the kind of more evangelical heavyweights, the Jerry Falwells of the world, were really sounding the alarm of like, we're losing the culture war. We got to like dig down. And gay people were like kind of the focus of that fear. And so these same ladies who would give you warm hugs and make you cookies would also be the ones who would be the most freaked out and anxious about like what was going to happen to our world. And like they would say, thankfully not during Sunday school, but like in church hallways and in church socials. And, well-meaning pastors who thought they were just teaching the truth and thought that they were teaching what they needed to teach to keep their congregation safe, saying things that had just like deep-seated fear and hatred in it. That when you're somebody who already going through puberty, already just like in middle school, like don't look at me or I'm going to jump out the window, like just that right. Insecurity that comes with a normal like puberty experience, and then you add this to it. It just, you look back and it's impossible not to internalize that much shame and self-hatred.
Yeah. This is something you wrote in your book. Nobody in my circle knew that when they expressed their disdain for LGBTQ people, they were talking about me. These conversations shaped my view of who I was, who God was, and what was most important in my life. They became the story I lived in and the story I lived out. So, yeah, I mean, those are heavy words. And like, as I read some of your story, I just felt empathy and also, looking back, just conviction about whatever part I might play in not being sensitive and not embracing what the gospel says about, hey, there aren't people that are worse gone than others. Like, we all need the saving blood of Jesus. And I've just even been wrestling the last 2 or 3 days. Like, God's been showing me some evil in my heart that I hate. And I'm like, oh, God, thank you for showing me, but I also don't like seeing it. And we never get past the fact that our hearts just are rebellious, and outside of the cleansing blood of Jesus, we're all in pretty bad shape. Yeah.
Well, and that we can nurture brokenness in our hearts without even realizing that we're nurturing it. I mean, and it's one of the most compelling cases to like original sin and sin nature that I know of, is that like I can be 34 years old and still have things that the Lord's like, hey, by the way, that thing you've been doing forever, that's sin. Like, it's.
Yeah. Hey, I'm about 20 years ahead of you and I still have that happening. So it probably doesn't give you hope, but you're not surprised by it anymore. It's like, all right, Lord, you're still refining, you're still revealing, you're still showing me I need the gospel as much as anyone.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps us worshiping him and not thinking we can achieve some level of righteousness. But that's my little mini sermonette. I want to go back to your story. So you have this encounter with Jesus that is just life-changing. And it sounds like you begin to experience a sense of being loved and freedom. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, I wanted to talk to people about my struggle and what I was experiencing. More than anything, I wanted to talk to my mom and dad. And at this point in my life, my mom was pretty heavy into an opioid addiction. So she had some major surgeries during the time when doctors were prescribing Oxycontin as the miracle drug that you can't get addicted to. And she got addicted to it. And I remember I think it might have been my senior year of high school. It was probably almost a year after I had like really come to know the Lord and been saved by him. It was my birthday and we had some friends over and we were all like crammed in on our couch in the living room. And I remember we were watching Saving Private Ryan and one of my friends fell asleep and he laid his head on my shoulder. And there was nothing sexual or romantic or cuddly about it. Like he just like fell asleep in his head, laying on my shoulder. And my mom came in she was in withdrawal at this point. Kind of the pattern is like when she was like on drugs, like very, very like neglectful and like distant. And when she was off drugs, like just hell hath no fury because she was going through withdrawals and that sucks. And she came and I remember like I feel this tug on my ear and like I look up at her and she like gestures towards me to follow her. And so we go outside and she asks me if I have a crush on that boy whose head was on my shoulder. And I said, no. And then she said, I need you to tell me the truth, Tony. Like, are you gay? And there was something like in the way she said that word gay that tipped me off that was not the time or place to let her know. And so I lied and I was like, absolutely not. And I don't want anything to do with that. And then she said to me, you can do anything and I will always love you, but you can't do that to me. Like I can't have a gay son. I can't do that.
Oh, wow.
And so I was just like, okay, never telling anyone. Like that's going under lock and key. And we can see how well that turned out as I talked to your podcast about it. But that's so painful and should never happen. But where the Lord was so gracious is I got to know in like a really real way what it means to have the Lord be your refuge. And when I was receiving, signals of shame and rejection from family or church or Fox News or what have you, like I could always go back to the secret place and just know that like I was loved by my Father, and that this thing that was an issue for pretty much everyone around me was not an issue with him. And so that sustained me for a really long time, until eventually it was time to share my story.
I mean, that's just amazing that God's love was so real to you, Tony, especially at that young age, as a teen, young adult. I mean, essentially to have your mom say, my love is unconditional except this one condition, and that be a part of your story. Like, I can't even imagine how like earth-shattering that is. But to have God be so personal, to cover you
Painful.
with his unconditional love, and that you knew that, like that's amazing.
Yeah, it's miraculous. And the term that comes to my mind whenever I'm alone with the Lord is just, you have preserved my life. You just miraculously, you have just gone out of your way to preserve me. And because it hasn't come without so much counseling, so much need for like real intensive, like mental health work and reconciling with my story. So I do not want to give the impression that it came easy. It also came with just a lot of grace and a lot of felt sense of the Lord being with me in it all.
Praise God. So you continue, and I understand you met a woman and fell in love with her and then got married. So how did all that happen?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Kelsey is my wife's name, and she's the best thing about me. Like, she's my favorite thing. Favorite thing about being alive is what I meant to say. She's not a thing. But I was 20. My mom died when I was 20, and I met Kelsey a month later. And at that point, I had dated a few girls, kind of like in an attempt that I just like got along really well with, but didn't have like any romantic or sexual attraction to. But I just thought maybe that's enough. Like, maybe it's great that we like similar things and we can laugh. And I hurt people. I hurt a couple of girls, like it was not fair to them. And so I kind of resolved. I had been a year and a half into resolving, I'm going to bachelor to the rapture. I'm not going to get married. I'm going to stay single and celibate. And in my church, it wasn't uncommon to talk about the gift of celibacy. And so I knew I could just do that, and there wouldn't be any more questions asked. But then Kelsey came into my life, and she's just like so funny and smart and cute and wise. And I just like would get all Twitter pated around her in a way that I never did around any of the other girls. And we started hanging out, and I kind of broke my rule and asked her out on a date. And our first date to this day is like the best day of my life. And we just like had so much fun and laughed so much and shared so much. And I realized that, I wasn't sexually attracted to her, but I felt like such a deep soul level affection for her that I've never felt for anyone. That I was just like, I think, and the way I knew it is like, when everything was going down with my mom, I had two best friends who are still my best friends to this day. And there was no one I loved hanging out with more than them. And I realized after our first date, I was hanging out with my best friends, and I was thinking about Kelsey the whole time. Like thinking about when I could get to see her again. And I was like, oh, wow, this is real. And so we dated, and I proposed, and we got married, and I never told her what I had experienced. She didn't know that at that point she was the only girl I'd ever really felt that strong of affection towards. And, I know this is appropriate for your show, but it was after getting married and me like praying on some kind of purity culture promise that our marriage vows would make sex just amazing and happen. And we just weren't able to make anything happen. And that went on. It was probably, I think it was a month and a half into our marriage before we we actually had sex, maybe 2 months.
Yeah.
And not without a ton of anxiety in me, like just a ton of just like fear and panic. And so that reignited a lot of depression and anxiety in me. That first few months of marriage was really scary. None of the affection went away, but I was hoping that the physical piece would come more naturally than it did. And it was a tough journey at first.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's very vulnerable and it's very real. So Kelsey still didn't know at this point what the anxiety was about and just what your experience had been.
Yeah. Yeah. The way she found out, and this will go back to answering the very first question you asked that I took a long rabbit trail around. But the way she found out was my best friend, this is 6 months into our marriage, my best friend confronted me. I was a youth pastor at the church I'd grown up at this point, and he was on my youth volunteer team. And he just said, man, there's something up here, and I know you're acting like how you were in high school. Like you're just depressed and anxious all the time, and I'm worried about you. I need you to talk to me because you're freaking me out. And I just fire hosed him with, 10 years of secrets and pain. And and he just like sat there and I could just see him taking it all in. And as soon as I was done, he was just like, I love you and you're still you to me. And just like gave me a big hug. And I reassured him that like, I am totally devoted to Kelsey and I'm going to figure this out. And I'm totally devoted to the Lord and his vision of scripture, his vision of marriage and sex. And, but I needed to get it out. And so he was the first person I told. Our church at that point was offering a counseling service. We had hired a counselor, and there was an arrangement where if you were a member of our church, the church would pay for half of all of your sessions with this counselor. And my friend was seeing this counselor, and he was really worried about me, and he had never known another believer who was experiencing what I experienced. And he went to this counselor, and he told her my story, and fully with the purpose of like trying to figure out how do I best help and support Tony? Like, what does he need from me right now? I'm the only person who knows this. And about 2 weeks after I told my friend, I get a text from my pastor, and he says, hey, I need you to come down to the office. We need to talk. So I drive to the church, and I go into his office, and I see that he's sitting there, and that counselor that my friend was seeing was sitting there. And as soon as I saw her, I knew that my friend had told her, and she went to my pastor. And so my pastor said, hey, Dennis had divulged to the counselor that you were homosexual, and I just need to know if that's true. And I said to him, and at that point, I didn't know the terms like that I think are helpful, like same-sex attracted or stuff like that. Right. So I was just like, yeah. I said, I've never called myself a homosexual, but yeah, I wrestle with that. And I struggle with that, and I have for a really long time. And his next question was, have you done anything to our kids? Because I need to know, if there's like, if they were a threat, we trusted you with our kids and you lied about this, and this is a slippery slope to more debased. And he tried to couch it in as compassionate language as he could. Like, I know that you wouldn't want to, but sometimes these things happen. And I was just like, absolutely not. And that I never would have in a million years have even considered something like that. And he told me that the church couldn't employ me anymore, and that I couldn't have my position at the church, and that I was still welcome to be there, but I needed to keep my distance from the youth and their parents, and he wanted me to do a year of therapy with this counselor who was sitting there and had just broken the confidence.
All right. So if I can just interject here, just to say all of that is so wrong. Like, I am so sorry. Like, everything from the breaking of the confidence with a counselor, which, as you, I'm sure, know, is illegal, unethical, wrong on every level. But also, that term homosexual, and I'm sure you know this as a pastor and as somebody who has lived this and studied this, like that that in the Bible was used to describe activity, not desires. And just from what you're describing, you had desires, but you weren't living based on those desires. You had chosen to honor the Lord with your body and honor your wife, and then to be judged because you have the desires, and to be fired and under question. And like, let me just pause for a minute and say how wrong that is, and how sorry I am that you experienced that, and that you're not the only one who's experienced something like that in a church context.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm so glad you pointed out that important distinction between behavior and desire, and what Scripture is clear about, and what Scripture has lots of grace for, and as painful and like shady and just mishandled as all of that was, like, there's still people who had way more horror stories, way more horrific experiences in church than what I had. You know, I've met people that make me feel like, wow, I got off easy for what I experienced. And I don't say that to belittle my pain. I say that to acknowledge that the magnanimity, the magnitude of how this issue has been mishandled, and some of the wrong thinking and beliefs behind it. And most pastors, like, genuine in a desire to protect people from sin and to guide and shepherd well, being fed really poisonous ideology and poisonous theological interpretations. It was a big problem 10 years ago. It's still a big problem today, which is why I wrote my book. And so we where my church was, and you know, it was so painful and so mishandled, and I'm able to look back and see, like, there's genuine attempts to care for me, like, in that. Like, we want you to see the counselor. Like, we don't want you to just, we're not kicking you out of the community, and stuff that now we look at and we're like, I should never have been asked to meet with that counselor. Like, that counselor shouldn't have been allowed to do work at the church anymore. She should have been let go. He should have shut it down as soon as she came to him. So, like, there's like a lot there that's just like shady and not good. But I want to own, because there was genuine, like, attempts at trying to care for me in that season, as misguided as they were. But that counseling, it turned into a year of, about 6 months of, we didn't call it conversion therapy or reparative therapy, but that's functionally what it was. In that year, Julie, nothing happened except for me my growing resentment towards myself, my growing resentment towards God. I'm like, okay, the one thing I hadn't tried up to this point was talking to people about it and confessing, and I've done that, and you're still not taking it away. My growing resentment towards the counselor in that church, and I just, like, we got to a point where, to the counselor's credit, she was like, I think, because she had not walked people through this process before either, so this was new for both of us, and she was like, I think what is best for you is to, like, accept that the Lord loves you and to try and walk in holiness with this. I don't know how to make this just go away. Right. And so we stopped after 6 months, and I was just completely depleted emotionally and spiritually. Really was like, you know, if the Lord's best is for my same-sex sexual attraction to be taken away, and I'm doing everything I know to do, and I'm listening to the most important spiritual authorities in my life for my whole life, and nothing's changing, then maybe there's just, like, no God. Like, maybe none of this was real. And like, maybe there's way more mysterious than I. And so it led to Kelsey and I taking about 8 or 9 months away from church, and well over a year of me, just like I alluded to earlier, just wandering through the wilderness of, like, what do I actually believe about any of this? Not because I was so smart and intuitive, because I was so hurt. And, like, because I don't want to give the impression that the people with their eyes open, they're the ones who doubt. Like, it was a wound and it was pain, and that's kind of where that led for us.
Yeah. How about Kelsey? I'm assuming that at this time you had to talk to her about what was going on, and what was that like in your marriage?
Yeah. So she got 2 pieces of bad news that day, because she found out that I had lost my job, and then she found out why. And and it was, I mean, to this day, the scariest, most devastating day in our marriage. And we've seen in 11 years now, we've seen a lot of hard days, but this was the one for us, or she. And granted, I just want to for the listeners to understand where Kelsey and I were coming from. We were still very much working within the day that I was let go. This is before all the counseling and the doubt had snuck in, working within that paradigm of this is a chosen life of sin. God would never allow somebody to experience same-sex attraction unless they wanted it, unless they were being willfully rebellious. Wow. And so I was maybe on some Freudian level, there's something in me that wants this and doesn't want God in the subconscious. And Kelsey interpreted that immediately as, well, if he wanted me, he wouldn't also want this. So there's no way that. And she took that immediately as he's choosing this and not me.
Sure.
And there was that first, that was 6 months into our marriage when that came out. And there would probably be for the next 4 or 5 months, just a lot of I don't know if we're going to stay married. I never wanted to end the marriage. I had no desire to, well, now I've got my out kind of thing. I wanted to stay with her, but she had a hard time reconciling that I could experience this and still love and choose her.
Sure.
And honestly, it wasn't until I was done with conversion therapy that I came home to Kelsey and I said, I think we just need to accept this is it. This is part of it for me. And that I still want you and choose you. And that was the kind of the changing point for us, where she started realizing and trusting and seeing how that, oh, wow, Tony has literally nothing to lose at this point. If he doesn't want me, he can just go, and he's staying. So that's kind of how the marriage. And honestly, I don't say this to be conceited. Kelsey and I think we seem to like each other more than most couples we know. we're just each other's best friends, and there are no secrets. And I think we have a pretty healthy rhythm in our sex life, and we just love each other. And I think it was because we had to work really hard at stuff that didn't come naturally to us. Right. I was seeing a counselor about 2 years ago, and I actually would love to hear your thoughts on this. But I was talking to my counselor, and he had said, and we were talking about mine and Kelsey's marriage and my story, and he said, what's interesting is a lot of couples, they get together and they're just filled with this intense erotic energy, and that sustains them for maybe a year or two. And then about 7 years in, they have to figure out how do they sustain romance and love and commitment. But it's sort of like you and Kelsey, because you didn't start with that intense erotic energy. It's almost like you started at year 7. You started at, we're choosing each other and we're figuring out ways to cultivate this intimacy in our marriage. Yeah. That was just a helpful way for me to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. People that listen to this podcast often will have heard me say, I think this whole idea that you marry for sexual chemistry is so wrong, and unfortunately it's repeated in the church that, you get married because you can't keep your hands off each other and you got to find someone you're in love with. And that makes somebody who experiences same-sex attraction feel like, well, then I can never get married. But biblically, marriage is a choice to covenant. And regardless of your attractions, you are going to have to work at it. And like you said, for a lot of couples, it might be easy for the first few years, but when some of that attraction and dopamine and all that starts to wear off, but also if you have children and health issues, and every couple is going to have to at some point say, I choose you. Maybe there's somebody else I'm more attracted to, or we're struggling with this, or I didn't know this about you. But because we're in covenant, I still choose you. I still choose to focus on you. We're going to work on our chemistry. And it makes me sad that it's like a story like what you're walking through is the only time we hear that, because I think there are an awful lot of individuals and couples who have that wrong framework, even in a marriage where there's not same-sex attraction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what is, for Kelsey and I, we had to find kind of our on-ramp to physical intimacy, because it wasn't, on face value, Like
Yeah.
at first it was like, I'm trying to get my body to do things it feels fundamentally hardwired not to do.
Right.
But like the more that we cultivated like trust and belonging and choosing each other, and then all of a sudden like sex became like an expression of how much I love and want this person. If it didn't originally start out as an
Yeah.
expression of just like erotic consummation. And I think like that's where all married couples ultimately need to get. Like that's what it needs to become.
Yeah.
Because and even just like and you know this, but like biologically, like our brains are desired to give us those attraction chemicals for like 12 to 16 months, and then they go away. Like, and so you have to figure out, what are you going to do after those things go away? And
Yeah, very, very true. I've had a few people on this podcast that are, have written books and been open about same-sex attraction and being in a marriage, but they've mostly been female. So Lori Krieg, Lori, Jackie Hill Perry, Rachel Gilson,
love Lori.
the amazing women of God who've talked about it from the perspective of being a woman who's battled this and been married. And what we know from the research is that female sexuality tends to be more fluid. It tends to be more mapped and wired by emotional connection than typically it is for a man. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, how is it different in a marriage when it's the husband who's wrestling through same-sex attraction?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is almost like that emotional connection piece is the key. And I think men, there is a sense where like, whether it's biology or social conditioning, or just expectations of men, that they're going to just like want to go out there and spread their seed all over the place. And that is, as you know, like cultivates emotional shallowness and an inability to cultivate fidelity.
Right.
And so for me, what was key was ultra leaning in, and the blessing of the worst day of our life is now there's no secrets. And so like we can actually start to get to know each other and actually start choosing and trusting each other. That emotional connection and that wide open door of like, there is an invitation here to physically and emotionally know this person as well as possible. And that knowing, like when we have sex, when we're intimate with each other, when our bodies start trusting each other and like feeling safe around each other in that way, like it just deepens and solidifies that knowing.
Yeah.
And so for men, the big difference I think is like, just being aware that, and being, I don't know if comfortable is the right word, but just coming to terms with the fact that like that desire to spread your seed all over the place is not going to go away, but that what ultimately is going to be most satisfying and most fruitful is to deepen where you're at. And if you can't do it immediately with your body, like you can do it with your heart and your mind, and you can do it with your body in ways that it starts with cuddling and starts with like just slowly building up to the point where that doesn't feel weird or unnatural anymore. I've talked to people who when I say that to them, like you can just see like the discouragement of like, I don't want sex to be something I have to get used to and build up to. And so the reason I bring that up is that's like a real valid thing to grieve and be bummed about. And there's no suck it up buttercup coming from me. Like that's hard. And it's hard when you like have people around you who marry the person that like all of their like endorphins are screaming for. And so like there is like a level of, yes, that's painful, but I think prioritizing what you want most more than what you want now has served me very, very well. And if what you want most is like a healthy, open, thriving marriage, then like doing the hard work of like deepening that physical intimacy in a way that isn't as connected to instant pleasure has cultivated for Kelsey and I just something really beautiful. We've seen a lot of like harsh, like we've seen pain from rejection from church, and we've had friends betray us and lost Kelsey's mom to COVID, and like we've just seen like really ugly stuff together and had financial issues and all this crisis of faith. But what has never been an issue is like our love and commitment to each other. And like, in fact, like I told my counselor recently the only thing in my life that has ever come easy is loving Kelsey. Everything else I've had to work my butt off for. Like the one thing that feels like is just easy for me is to love Kelsey. And it's because in those early years, we busted our butts to cultivate that. And we continue to maintain that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're sharing there is so profound, not just for a couple that is experiencing the kind of challenges that you and Kelsey have been through, but in general, I think men have really been discipled to think of their sexuality in terms of that more immediate pleasure, responding to my desire, and through authentic intimacy in working with couples and men in general, when they understand the call to deeper intimacy, that it's not just about responding biologically, but going on a journey of intimacy and being known and pressing through the difficult things. Like I've seen the light bulb come off on for men who are just like, I didn't even know I desired this. It's been covered up by so much pornography and lust, and this is what men do, and it's all about the physical act, that when it gets unlocked, that actually they desire that deep intimacy as much as their wives do, and it's a God-given beautiful desire. There's like a freedom that I think has really been robbed for a lot of men.
Yeah, I feel like that's the plot twist in human sexuality, especially Christian sexuality, is like the stereotype of women not wanting sex is fundamentally untrue. And the stereotype of men not wanting genuine, deep intimacy is fundamentally untrue. Even if like we're discipled by the church or the culture to believe it is. Yeah,
absolutely. So you said that you and Kelsey have experienced a lot of pain, and some of that pain has come from the church. I know you are in ministry, you're an associate pastor, and you are thriving in your faith. Maybe you can close with a hopeful story of just how you've seen changes and have experienced love in the church in a way that represents who God is as a redeemer and healer.
That's so good. Yeah, I have more stories of that than I do of painful stories. And honestly, the first one came when Kelsey and I decided to start going back to church. We went to a church in our hometown, Springfield, Oregon, and the pastor of that church was a guy named Dave Lanning. And Dave had known me for a long time, just Springfield's not a huge city. And they needed a youth pastor, and Dave knew that I had been a youth pastor for 5 years and wasn't anymore. And so we started getting together, and he started learning my story. And I thought the door for ministry had been closed for me forever. And I had actually gone back to college to to get a counseling degree. And he asked me to come on staff as his youth pastor. And he took a lot of hits. Some people from my former church called and said, I can't believe you're hiring him. People from the church that we had worked at families left once they found out this piece about my story. And he took hits, and he stood by me every step of the way, because his character and his integrity said, your desires are not the thing that condemn you. You have repeatedly, he'd said this to me, you've repeatedly chosen to set aside the things that people are accusing you of to cultivate intimacy with the Lord and your wife. And he saw a ministry gifting in me. And that just that was, that just in a weird way, that was the big redeeming person in my life was Dave Lanning. And that led to us planting a church and me writing now my second book, and all of this stuff that just would not have happened without Dave just taking the hits and holding the line. And and so since then, I'm at a church here in Newberg, Oregon, and there's just the first sermon I gave was sharing my testimony, and people have just been so leaning in. Even the people who are most uncomfortable with it had me over for dinner, asked really hard questions, but just huge open hearts. And so that gives me a lot of hope that we want to believe that the Lord's table is big enough for all of our stories, no matter how messy or how complicated. And I've seen a lot of people who don't struggle with what I've struggled with feel permission to be open about some of their biggest, deepest shames, because in their minds, the biggest, deepest shame was what I experienced. So their thoughts were, man, if he can be open about that, then I can be open about that abortion I had in high school, or about like this thing that I've struggled with, or these things that I've kept secret and buried for so long, that we can now confess to community and let the light of the Lord in. So yeah, that has been wonderful and beautiful, and yeah, I'm grateful for it.
As I said in the beginning of this episode, I am so deeply grateful for Tony's courage and humility in sharing his story. You know, conversations like this one require a lot of vulnerability and a willingness to trust that God's grace is greater than our fears, our questions, and even our failures. Sexual struggles a lot of times will touch the deepest places in our identity, that longing to be known, to be loved, to be accepted. Tony's story reminds us that sometimes we might encounter people within church communities who don't know what to do with the messiness of our story. But God doesn't turn away, not even in our weakness or confusion. Instead, He meets us there and invites us to walk with Him in truth and grace all the way to transformation. If this conversation resonated with you, I want to encourage you to pick up a copy of Tony's new book. It's called Love All Our Neighbors: How Churches That Hold a Traditional Sexual Ethic Can Care for LGBTQ People. We'll include a link to that in our show notes, along with several articles and Q&A videos from Authentic Intimacy that may help you continue to explore this important topic. Thanks for joining me, and I'll meet you next time for more Java with Juli.